It is good to be, wow, that went way louder than I thought it was going to. I told someone earlier, my brother-in-law, Caleb, said, he's like, hey, didn't know you had as loud a voice as you did. Like, look, like no one's ever had to tell me to speak up. They've told me many things. They've told me to do the opposite, but no one's ever had to tell me to speak up. It's good to be with you again tonight. It was good to be with you this morning. You have proven that it is certainly possible for you to encourage me just as much, if not more, than I feel like I can encourage you with anything that I have to say. And I do appreciate that. A lot of you had a lot of really uplifting things to say this morning. It was good to get to meet some of you, to remember some fewer than I met, but I'll try. And I do want to say before we get into the lesson tonight that I really appreciate a couple of things that you all are doing here that may be normal for you, but I don't necessarily see everywhere. You seem very dedicated to making sure that the things that you do here aren't limited to just the people who are able to be here all the time. I know it's becoming a little bit more common to broadcast and stream things, but it is very encouraging to see Christians today using the progress, the technology we've been allowed to attain for good uses like that. Some people can't make it out, be here, but maybe they can have something. Some people may be looking for the truth and may find it through that medium. And what's going on also right now, it is very encouraging when I am able to be with groups that are making sure that God's message is being heard or understood, to be perhaps more accurate, by everyone, regardless of what challenges they may face, especially when it comes to language and translation. I appreciate how your love for the Lord and how your love for the truth and your love for each other comes out in that. And I really hope that continues to grow here. So some of you who are here tonight were not here this morning, but this morning we talked about the idea of Christ through marriage, and we looked at Ephesians chapter 5, and what Paul says about the husband loving his wife as Christ does the church, and the wife submitting to the leadership of her husband as the church does to Christ, and more than just how that applies to marriage, how that is a teaching tool, that's an example, it's an illustration of some really fundamental things that God wants everybody in the body of Christ to understand, because we are all tasked with understanding both God's love for us and therefore how to love, and the kind of submission that all of us are supposed to render to our one head, who is Christ. But I did mention that tonight we were going to spend a little less time on how important marriage is as a teaching tool and the why and sort of the sobering, motivating reality of marriage, and talk a little bit more about the what and the how. It's one thing to say it's really important to have a good marriage. It's another thing to say, and this is how you do that. So I'd like for us to look at that tonight. You know, I once heard a brother say that perhaps one of our greatest failures in teaching the Sermon on the Mount is when we fail to apply it to the marriage relationship. And what would that look like? What would it look like if the things that Jesus taught in that collection of his teachings, if more of Matthew chapters 5 through 7 were applied to our marriages? More than just Jesus' teaching on lust and adultery and divorce. Because when I look at that section of Scripture, I don't see Jesus excluding that relationship from the application of his teachings. As a matter of fact, the teaching is general enough that it could apply to any relationship that you have, including a marriage. And so if Jesus doesn't exclude any relationship, and if he doesn't limit his application of his teachings, why should we? So we won't tonight, and we don't have time to go through the entire Sermon on the Mount. but we want to look at just a section here and see how Jesus' teaching here should change each one of us for sure, but specifically how it should transform our marriages. So let's open up our Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to begin this evening in Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to start reading in verse 38. Matthew 5:38 beginning. Jesus says there, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you." Now, all throughout Jesus' teaching, he is constantly drawing a distinction between what is normal for people, what they're used to, and what's right. And Jesus illustrates here trading pain for pain, answering hurt with more hurt. That is normal. People do it all the time. You hit me, hit you back, end of story. It's kind of understood. I'm going to make you feel the way that I just felt. And Jesus says, no. No, you don't. You don't do that. Instead, you endure that pain. And you let yourself be hurt. And I think the natural response to that is, wait, what? I'm not supposed to defend myself? I'm not supposed to do anything about what that person just did to me? No, you're not. Instead of being defensive, be vulnerable. Let me make something clear, because I can see someone asking me the question, so are you against self-defense? To answer your question, no. But I also don't think that that's exactly the image that Jesus wants us to get here. It's not so much like we're locked in confrontation right now and I am trying to fend you off of me. Not so much that. The hurt you have done has been done. The damage has been done. You have already caused the pain. And I'm contemplating returning that in kind. Making you feel how bad I just felt when you did what you did to me. And think about how Jesus illustrates that. If someone slaps you, it doesn't just hurt because they slapped you, right? I mean, the slap hurts well enough if the person's not like a total wimp, but it hurts a little bit more than that. Hurts because of the disrespect. Hurts because of the embarrassment. Those hurt too. Here's the thing though. If you're feeling hurt, if you're feeling disrespected, if you're feeling embarrassed, be willing to feel even more. What would happen, spouses, if we stopped being so defensive? There's a loaded question if I've ever asked one. What would happen if I stopped being so defensive all the time? If my concern wasn't primarily with protecting myself from being hurt, but just doing what was right? How would that change me? And how would that change how I behaved in my marriage? What if, when I was hurting, when I was feeling disrespected, when I was feeling embarrassed, I started seeking the strength to suffer more, not the strength to subdue the one who was causing me the suffering? Would that make me more or less like Jesus? I'll let you answer that question in your own mind. But I encourage you to think about what it is that Jesus sought the strength to do in prayer, in the garden, before the Father. But then Jesus switches this image to someone suing you and taking the very clothes off your back. Where does that leave you, by the way? Half naked, exposed, probably ashamed. But again, if you would suffer loss, lose some more. Then Jesus illustrates it another way. It's a traveling companion. But think about it. You're forced, you're compelled. If you have to be forced to do anything, then you didn't want to do it. Now, do more of what you didn't want to do in the first place. How would that change me? How would I function differently in my marriage? It may seem like sort of a silly illustration to you, but my wife walks out, she goes to work in the morning, says, BJ, it stinks. Can you please take the garbage out? Now, I could say, why do I have to take the garbage out? And not do it at all. I could not say anything, and I could take the garbage out, and I could do it reluctantly. Or I could take the garbage out and maybe clean the kitchen and do the dishes while I'm at it. Which one of those three do you think fits the kind of attitude that Jesus is talking about here? And how would my marriage be different if I concerned myself more with being that kind of person? But then Jesus gives us another image in that of giving. Look, if someone's begging, they can't pay you back. That's why they're begging. And if someone's borrowing, they may not give it back. Give it to them anyway. Be willing to lose what is yours so someone else can have something that they didn't earn and maybe that they don't even deserve. And there's a natural question, I think, that as humans we kind of want to ask at this point. Well, all right, BJ, but I'm hurting and I'm hurting and I'm hurting and I'm losing and I'm losing and I'm losing and I'm giving and I'm giving and I'm giving. What about me? Who takes care of me? I have needs too. I have things that I want. Do those matter? We won't look at the section in the Sermon on the Mount here, but I think Jesus has an answer for that thinking. For the one who would ask, but God, what about my needs? And to the one worrying about that, I think you know what Jesus' answer is. Disciple, concern yourself with seeking the kingdom of God and His righteousness. He will take care of your needs. I can't tell you how, and it may not be the way that you would prefer, but you can trust that He will. And that need not be something that hinders me from doing the right thing to someone who maybe isn't doing the right thing back. Let's pick up reading again in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 43. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For He makes His sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Love your neighbor, hate your enemy. It's normal. It's what we're used to. People do it all the time. Yeah, it's also wrong. Jesus says, love your enemies. I don't think that he's being very unclear about that, and I don't think that there's any way around that in this passage. But I want us to notice here that love is an action. It is not a feeling. It is not a state of being. And I want you to notice the words even that Jesus uses to tell us how we should treat people who mistreat us. Did you notice as we were reading some of the verbs that he even uses? Turn, let, go, give, pray, greet. These are conscious decisions, choices. You choose to turn the other cheek. You choose to let them take your stuff. You choose to go farther on the road. You choose to give what you won't get. You choose to pray for those who persecute. You choose to greet those who aren't a part of your inner circle. Here's the thing. I can only choose to do any of those things to my enemy if I decide now to do those things to everyone before I know who my enemies are. I think that makes sense in a couple ways. Number one, if I'm not in the situation yet, but I don't plan for how I'm going to be when I get into that situation, how do I know how I'm going to respond? I'm kind of just banking on it being second nature and automatic. Well, here's the problem with that. And I think this is the other way that it makes sense. If this is as difficult as I think that it is, and I don't think that Jesus leaves us with any other impression than that, if it were not difficult, he wouldn't have to tell us to do it. If it were automatic, he would not have to tell us and teach us and remind us and command us to do these things. We would just do them. So if it is, in fact, that difficult, is it very likely that my good intention to just do the right thing and love my enemies when I find myself in that situation, that's just gonna happen if I don't make that the way that I am all the time with everyone, enemy or not? I don't think it's very likely that that'll happen at all. Oh, there's a question that probably should be asked at this point. Should you consider your spouse your enemy? And at this point, you can all shake your heads no. The proper answer to that question is no. However, there is a great difference between should and do. It's different to say, should you consider your spouse an enemy? Should you consider someone in a relationship that you claim to love, that you have devoted yourself to, an enemy? It is quite another thing to say, have you ever done that? At which point, I would imagine, unless there is a married couple in here that has never fought about anything, that you can probably go ahead and say yes. Now, for those of you who may have such strong marriages that I envy and you have never fought about anything, this still applies to you. Because if this is the way I ought to treat my enemy, how much more should I treat my spouse this way? And for the rest of us, even if I find myself set in opposition with my spouse, it doesn't matter, because even if I feel enmity between us, love is still the command here. Jesus relates this to God and how he treats people, because that's the whole point. I'm not doing this because I feel loving or because you seem very lovable right now. I'm doing this because I am a child of my Father, and this is what He does, and I'm trying to be like Him. Period. And I think this is kind of simple, the way that Jesus illustrates this, but pretty powerful. The way that He talks about God providing. Look, no sun, no rain, crops don't grow, people don't eat, and they die. Simple enough. And yet God creates, He provides for, and He takes care of even those who laugh at the very idea of His existence. It's probably worth taking some time and thinking about that from time to time. The very atheistic philosophers of our day who make a living on spreading false teaching about the existence of God are only able to do so with the breath God allows them to have. And that is the kind of incredible love and patience and mercy that God shows every moment of every day to every person, including His own, but even His enemies, of which all of us were. And Jesus says, now you do the same. And if you don't, what reward do you have? Now, this is a rhetorical question. Here's the thing about rhetorical questions. They do have answers, and they are meant to be answered. The answers aren't given so it can make a bigger impact when you answer them. And the answer to this question, what reward do you have, is not none. The answer is you do have a reward. And this is it. If you give to people for what you get from people, what you get is all you get. That is your reward. But if your reward is that you want to be with your Father in heaven, Jesus says, then you have to be like your Father in heaven. And there just is no getting around that here. But I think that makes an impact on us, not just individually, but think about within our marriages. Why do I do what I do? Is it because my wife has earned or deserves my love? No, it isn't. Why does she do what she does? Is it because I've earned it? I certainly have not. Or because I deserve it? Sometimes I will be the first to say, I really don't. But we love each other anyway. Why? Because we're both trying to be like somebody who shows that kind of love to us all the time. And here's the problem with rooting it in the other person's worth or deserving. At some point, it's going to be really hard to love them because they're not going to deserve it in our eyes. They won't have done enough to earn it. And you know what? Sometimes in relationships, that other person will do something that hurts so much, there isn't anything they can do to make up for it so that they can be deserving, so that they can earn that back. Oh, but wait, isn't that exactly what our relationship with God is like? Fundamentally. The way we messed up, there wasn't anything we could do. We weren't ever going to be deserving. We weren't ever going to earn anything. Our hope lies in the fact that God is a God of grace, not of justice strictly. That He is the justifier, not just the just. And if that's the kind of way that God is with us, and we want to be like him, don't we need to be that way with everyone in every relationship that we have, including our marriages? But as we wrap up our reading tonight, I want us to continue on into chapter 6, Matthew chapter 6, and we'll read verses 1 through 4. Jesus goes on, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." So, people do good things to be noticed all the time. And I mean all the time. Whole segments of our society are kind of built on that. I think it has, unfortunately, given even things like the term charity a bad name and a bad taste in the mouths of many. But just because people do it doesn't make it right. Praise, adoration, thanks, recognition, if these are the things that we seek when we do good, when we do what's right, then these are the only things that we get. Because that's not like God. Now, granted, we give God all of those things because it's good for us to honor God for who he is. Failing to do so, Paul says in Romans chapter 1, is the first step toward every single corrupt and evil thing that man practices. But God doesn't need our praise and our adoration and our thanks and our recognition. As a matter of fact, in Acts chapter 17, Paul says God doesn't need anything. You know what? It's a good thing, too, because he very seldom receives it, even from his own people. I think you know that, because the Old Testament scriptures that were recorded for our learning records a lot of God's people failing to appreciate God. And I think we know that when we come to the gospel narratives. Why does it stand out so much in the gospel narratives when people actually praise Jesus for who he is and thank him for what he did? Because those people number in a small minority. Healed 10 lepers. Questioned by the end of the story, where are the 9? Out of 10, one came back to give him thanks. And the one that no one would expect. And yet he still sacrificed everything. John says at the beginning of his gospel in John chapter 1, he went to his own people, his own. I think you could take that in a couple different ways. His own people, he was a Jew. His own people, some of his own family at first. And they didn't receive him. But he gave his life for those people. Why? Because it was good. Because it was right. Because he loved them. That's what he intended to do. Because that's what love is. But not because everybody responded to him the way that they ought to have, because, frankly, most didn't. and most still don't. So, when I look at this passage, what I hear is, stop drawing attention to how much you sacrifice. Especially since we often, I think, use this as a means to get other people to treat us better, which we've already established is not our job, to make other people treat us better. It's our job to just do what's good and right regardless of how other people treat us. And I think Peter would agree with that based on what he writes in 1 Peter chapter 2 and the example that Jesus set for us. I have to say, I don't want to give the impression that, I don't struggle with this. In fact, probably out of everything we're talking about tonight, I'm extremely guilty of this. I got a bunch of chores done. I got a bunch of errands done. I'm still in school. I don't graduate until April. I did schoolwork too. I work a job. I took out the trash, and I did do the dishes, and I did clean the kitchen, and I prepared the meal, and it's on the table already. I deserve a break. I deserve to have my evening be the way that I want it to. Why? Because I have done so much. I have put so much time in. I have sacrificed so much. I have given so much of my time and my energy and my attention to do all of these good things for you. My wife hasn't been around for any of that. She comes home. It's not that she's unappreciative. I know someone's going to be like, BJ, that was probably not so good. Now everybody thinks that your wife doesn't appreciate. That's just go with me here. I love my wife. My wife loves me. But say she comes home and none of those things are on her mind. Maybe the thing on her mind is the thing that I said I was going to do and forgot to do, but it was pretty important. Are you kidding me? I did this thing, and I did this thing, and I did this thing, and then while I was doing that, I did this other thing, and I did this other thing that you didn't even ask me to do. Do you even care? Do you even understand? I gave so much. I sacrificed so much. All I want. Is there anything about that Jesus agrees with, endorses, or condones here? Absolutely not. Because that's not him. Woe to mankind if Jesus ever had that attitude. So why should we? So here's a novel idea. How about this? Do the right thing and don't bring it up. Just do it. I feel like I need to pay Nike royalties for saying that, but it's effective. Just do the right thing. Maybe you did do 17 things and they only did one. Okay. Find a way to thank them and tell them how much you appreciate the one thing that they did do. How about that? Would that make you more or less like your Father in heaven? I think you know the answer to that. How much would you have to change to be like what we studied this evening? For some, maybe it's more. For some, maybe it's less. I don't know. But for all of us, how much more like Christ would we be if we changed whatever it was that we needed to change? And particularly for those of us who are married, because I've been trying to apply that more to that particular relationship tonight. How much better would our marriages be if we were this kind of person? If we were the kind of person who hurt and hurt more? If we were the kind of people who lost what was ours and then turned around and gave more to people who couldn't give anything back? If we were the kind of people who, when we had to do something we didn't want to do, we did more than we were expected to do? if we didn't make how much someone else deserved our kindness a condition for our kindness, if our choosing to demonstrate love stopped being interrupted by how loving we felt or how lovable that other person happened to be at the time, if we provided for and cared for people who sometimes, it seemed, didn't care like we existed or didn't notice, and if that was okay because we weren't doing it to be noticed anyway, if we didn't need to be praised all the time, didn't need to be adored, didn't need to be thanked, didn't need to be recognized, if we just did the right thing and didn't bring it up, could anyone's marriage here improve if you, not your spouse, if you tried to be this person every day? Set that aside. Could any relationship you have in this life improve if you, not the other person, if you tried to be this person every day? I think the answer to that question is yes. The thing is, the question that remains, I can't answer for you. Yes, our relationships would improve if we would be this type of person. But only you can answer the question, yeah, but are you actually going to try to do it? And if you have been doing it and it's been taking a toll on you, are you going to choose to keep doing it and not give up? In a moment, we're going to stand and sing a song for our encouragement. And as we sing that song, as we think about what we studied tonight, I hope that we try to take a look at ourselves and see if we're particularly struggling with these things. Now, I would actually be really concerned if anybody in here said they don't struggle with anything that we've talked about tonight. So, I mean, we all kind of are in the same boat here. But maybe you are especially struggling with it. I mean, maybe it's been really hard for you lately to not hurt someone who's hurt you. Maybe it's been really hard to love someone and choose to love someone when the feeling just is not there. Maybe it's been really hard for you to not care so much about being thanked and appreciated for all the things that you are in fact doing. God's here to help you. So are God's people, to help you be that person. We want to do that. So if there's a way that we can assist you in making changes and rendering obedience to the Lord tonight, why don't you come forward and let us know while we stand and sing.